And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Soul Survivor podcast. I'm your host, Ryan, and you'll notice that Dylan isn't here today. He has a conflict as he's traveling, but I have a great guest to help me out, my good friend, Brett. Brett, how are you?
I'm good, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. I wish I could show video. I'm not hiding right now, but we had,
Yeah.
weren't able to figure out the video, but it's okay. Very happy to be on. I've been listening to your podcast. You guys do a great job. So happy to just fill in for a week. And as you know, I'm a big Survivor fan myself. I've been watching since season one. So very interesting premiere, and there's going to be a lot of interesting thoughts to say about this.
Yeah, no, like Brett said, hopefully we'll figure out the camera for future weeks. So I think what will happen this season is based on, Dylan's work schedule. Either it'll be Dylan and I as usual, or if he can't join, I'll get Brett or one of our other friends that watch to hopefully join me and we'll just talk about it, get some new perspectives. But we'll figure out the camera for future weeks. And I'm happy to have Brett here because Brett is somebody even more than me. I know I say that I like old school Survivor. Brett is ride or die old school Survivor. So if you have any like old opinions or any old references, Brett is the one that you want to go to.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I guess I do sort of offer that opinion of someone who is kind of a traditionalist with the show, and I think that both you and I have been sort of reluctant with some of the changes that have been made in the new era. Some I think have kind of fit in better than others, but others are still sort of sticking out, whether it's editing styles or the way they're depicting characters these days that I still have reservations about. But ultimately, I think Ryan, you'd agree, it comes down to the cast, and just as any other season, there's highlights here and maybe some that are not popping. But we'll get into that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think first and foremost, it comes down to the cast. Like we obviously always enjoy different locations like they used to do, different themes they used to do, but tried and true, if you have a great cast, you have a great season. That's kind of what the magic comes down to. And I think going into this season, I know you and I and some friends, we had a little draft. We talk about the cast a little bit. And I think we all had a little bit of reservations, to be honest. But I'll admit, coming out of this premiere, I think I left better than I came in with. Do you have any other overall premiere thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as I was talking to you about, because I watched the premiere a day late, and that's why we're kind of doing this a little bit later. I didn't like the fact that there was not enough camp building scenes. It's just something that, again, as someone who's been a fan since season one, you sort of expect it. That's part of the survival aspect of the show. And they keep telling you how hard it is to survive and how tough things are, but they don't show it
Yeah.
in the scenes. And just not having any sort of camp building and where we get to know all the characters, for a 2-hour premiere, I don't know why they can't insert some of those scenes in there. And I think that's a big problem with the way the show is edited today. But
Yeah.
other than that, I do agree with you that there was definitely some surprise characters that were not on my radar that I think popped in the first episode. And then there were a couple that I think we'll get into that were kind of surprising duds on the other end. So yeah, it was a mixed bag, but I think that there's a lot of potential with this cast. There are some fiery characters in there.
Oh my God. Yeah. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of characters, some gamers, but also some really kooky characters as well. I think you need that mix for a great season. You can't have all game bots, as you and I
Right.
don't want a lot of game bots. But on the other hand, if you have a bunch of people like you could say like One World where they're all recruits and they don't know the game, all it
Mhm.
takes is one Kim Spradlin to just run the table. So you need a good mix of both fans and just ordinary regular people. And I'm hoping that this season we have a good mix of both.
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing, and I think again we mentioned it when we were talking earlier off air, but there was that in the beginning of the season, which sort of sets the tone. You have this big change where Tevin, and I guess we'll get into where Tevin does the opening narration, not Jeff, which
Mm.
is I believe a change. I know you're the Survivor historian, so you would know if that ever happened before, but I don't think it has. And then even sort of like the each person getting like a visual backstory, almost like the Big Brotherification of Survivor and sort of intros. I wonder sort of again that's the sort of direction that the new era of Survivor is going. But really, it does mark this shift of Jeff really taking over in terms of the production style of the show, which is interesting. I mean, there could be some good things that come from that, or some bad things. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. I think that Jeff is for a long time has been both the host and the producer. Obviously, when he first started, he was just mainly the host.
Right.
And I think you're right. Now we're seeing a new era. In this era, I mean, for Jeff has even been before 41. But, Jeff has taken a lot of center stage. There's a lot of his ideas. Some of them have worked out in the past. Lately, we've been a bit critical of some newer ones. It's, I think, Brett, a good comparison for you as someone who's a Jets fan is kind of like Bill Belichick, where some people feel like Bill should just stay as the coach and not be also the GM, because Belichick, the coach, is way better than Belichick, the GM. I feel like if you were to poll a lot of fans, that you can keep Jeff as the host, because we know and love Jeff for 46 seasons now, 24 plus years. But Jeff Probst, the producer, may want to pass that off to another body if that's what the fans want. I'm not saying Jeff will or should do that. I'm just saying maybe if you had polled the fans, that's maybe what their opinion is.
Yeah, it could be. And, I think, and we were talking about it before the season as well. There was that article that came out about Jeff saying that he doesn't want villains on the show anymore, which, we both were like reacted in horror to, because some of the greatest ever contestants on the show are villains. I mean, maybe the most notable ones are villains. I truly, going back to season 1 of Richard Hatch, which is what made me a fan of the show and of the reality competition genre of television, right? And having those nefarious villains are what drives the arc of the show each season. And we're seeing, I think we're actually, for what I see of the next episode, and we'll get into it, but Venus already is emerging as maybe the villain of the season to some, or at least is edited that way. I just don't see how you can have this show where you're trying to depict that this is a, microcosm of American society, but not show the way that people are rubbing each other the wrong way, or people getting into arguments or little tiffs with each other. Like, that is what drives the show, and it's what drives overall society. Conflict between people, the relationships people build and then break off with each other. That is what makes Survivor fascinating. We need villains on the show, and it's not editing things in a weird way that doesn't depict what actually happens. Just, you have to be able to show people's flaws. Not everyone's a perfect person with a backstory that's tragic and they're them overcoming it. There's people have rough around the edges, and you need to show that in the edit.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really good point too. And I'll say one last thing before we dive into the episode. But basically, if I have to be objective about this, because I, like you, heard some of Jeff's comments and was like, ooh, I'm not sure how I'm feeling about that. But what I will say is, to take a step back, Jeff clearly still likes people who play the game hard and people who are willing to backstab. Like, obviously, not I know not for you, but for people that like Jesse, they love seeing Jesse stab Cody in the back. And I think Jeff still wants big gameplay and backstabbing. Jeff has even said, don't take my comments out of context. There will be some brutal moves this season, and I'm looking forward to it. But I guess what Jeff was trying to say was like, oh, I don't want people who are coming in deliberately to be rude and villain and burn people's stuff, which, we still want that. You and I still want our hardcore villains. But I mean, I'm hoping that the comments were maybe taken a little overblown, and we still see some people like Venus, some people maybe even like, I'm trying to think of someone else on the season, maybe like Liz, who can be villains, but like villains, maybe just not the classic ones.
Yeah, and I guess there's that element of sort of like, we want villains that are natural, right? And it's just a natural extension of who they are in real life. We don't want people going on the show trying to be a villain or trying to be something they're not. And that's something about as well, and we'll get into the episode. I don't want to be all negative, but my last real big critique of this new era is the sort of worship of the show, right? And worship of Jeff as a host, and kind of people playing up to the cameras. I think we're even seeing that to some extent, where everyone seems very like media trained and kind of knowing what they're going into. And that's where we're talking about the recruits versus super fans sort of argument, that there is this sort of middle ground that's best. But one objectively good thing about recruits, I think, was that they weren't coming in with preconceptions on how to behave on the show in front of the cameras. And that makes a big difference for me as a viewer. Just that feeling of, I don't want to see people playing up to the cameras, or I don't know, trying to be part of Survivor lore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, like I think even people who are super fans can bring something new to the show. And there are some super fans on the show clearly this season that seem great. So we'll get into that.
Yeah, so I guess, in terms of playing things up or kind of just, being themselves, for better or for worse, I guess let's start with that. Brett, our headline for the premiere is Jelinski with maybe an all-time first boot exit in the vein of like a Zayn Knight reincarnated. Jelinski has a flame out of an episode and goes out unanimously 5-0 because he himself could not vote. Obviously, want to start there before we get into the rest of the episode like we do. What are your thoughts on Jelinski? Because I'm sure you have them. And then the classic question we always ask on the show, Brett, is like, was this the right decision by the tribe or by certain people?
My overall thoughts on Jelinski, it's weird because this guy looked like he was like in his 30s or like pushing 40.
He's 42. He's the youngest cast member, Brett.
Yeah, it's crazy because he looks old, but I think the way he played was very immature, very young. And, talking about the whole thing, I've said this to you before as well, but like wanting to be called by his last name and calling himself a legend in all of the, confessionals when he was on the beach. And actually, we're not even in the confessionals, right? Did he say it to everyone or no? No, he said only in the confessionals, right?
What, Jelinski?
Did he say that he was a legend, like in front of people, or no?
Oh, yeah, he said that in confessional. He was like, if I can get out just here, I'm a legend. Which
right, or like it would be a legendary move or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like he was, I think that he wasn't prepared for the social aspect of the game like it needed to be. And we saw him fold a couple of times. I mean, I don't look. If I was in his case when they were doing that physical challenge, I probably would have done the same thing. To be honest with you, I'd have been like, we can't do this. So I don't blame him for that. But when they were on that on the task and he just gave up, it was so foolish. And and he still had that kind of arrogant attitude at tribal. He had to read the room better. And I think that's why, to your second question about whether it was the right move, I think ultimately I agree with Q's mentality that like this guy is just going to think that he's the best at everything and that he can do no wrong, but he's clearly not sort of up for playing the game in some ways. So I can agree with the decision, even though Jess was also really a prime target to go. I mean, it was very clearly between the two of them. I think ultimately, though, Jelinski's sort of strange attitude is what sent him home, and I think appropriately so.
Yeah, I think obviously, and Jeff mentioned this on Tribal, it's the classic question, even if you go back to early seasons as well. Like, do you keep somebody that you trust, or do you keep somebody that will help you in the challenges? And, obviously, when it comes to a physicality point, Jelinski will, I think, help you more than Jess will in the challenges. The problem with that is if he's going to quit on certain tasks and he quit basically on 2 of the 3 tasks that he did, which was the sweat task and the journey with the deceit cards, that's not great for you being an asset in challenges. And furthermore, yeah, go ahead.
And then he failed on the other one.
And he failed the puzzle. Yeah. So he's struck out 0 for 3, basically. So at that point, it's like, is he really helping you more than Jess in that case? And then the other point, which is like, well, maybe you also trust Jelinski more than Jess because Jess is not making social bonds because she's lacking sleep. And Jelinski's in your alliance, the 4-person alliance that we'll get into. But if he can't really be trusted to, keep his mouth shut, or he's going to fold in the face of pressure from other alliances, he's not checking off any of the buckets there. So I feel like it really did make a lot of sense for the group, mainly the alliance of Q, Tiffany, and Kenzie, to maybe get out Jelinski here.
Yeah, and I think you look at, that 4, and really, I mean, all 3 of Q, Kenzie, and Tiffany actually, to me, popped as characters and as maybe game players in this first episode. Jelinski really didn't seem like a good fit in that alliance. You have Banu on that tribe as well, who, appears very emotional and kind of over the top. Obviously, Jess, we saw her really struggling. So maybe that's why they brought Jelinski in as the 4th. But I think even with him, the mentality and I think gameplay awareness was not there compared to the other 3. So now I think Q, who really sort of, I guess you would say, orchestrated the vote, or at least seemed to be the determining factor, he might be able to take control of that tribe now. So I think it was a pretty good move for him to get rid of Jelinski.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, too, because I was saying throughout the episode, because I was watching with a friend, I said to her that, like, Q wants Jelinski gone and Kenzie really wants, Jess gone, who's going to have more sway? And obviously it turns out that Q kind of got his wishes. So you could say that, Q has more of a pull in this group than Kenzie does, but Kenzie's obviously very social, a great potential social player, but maybe even Kenzie was like, I got to cut my losses at some point. But I think the other thing as well is that, like, I think, Brett, even if you go back to early seasons too, like, you never want to be the first boot. So you'll do whatever it takes. And some people will look for any excuse to get rid of people. And I think the fact that Jelinski not only was making these mistakes, but he had no vote and he can't play a shot in the dark. And also, by the way, even if he somehow found an idol, he would have voted for Jess in that case. So if you're Q, Tiffany, and Kenzie, voting out Jelinski can't backfire on you in any way, shape, or form. And you can just cut Jess next week if you want to, or you can cut Banu. So for them, it's kind of like, is there any risk to getting rid of Jelinski? There's no risk here.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it ended up being sort of a pretty straightforward tribal. I was pretty sure that Jelinski was going to go because, as you said, there was no downside to getting rid of him. I think that and the thing is, I think Jelinski actually, in some ways, could have been more of a dangerous player than Jess, at least in the minds of the other people on the tribe. You look at Jess and someone who's kind of that struggling that much. Although it's funny because we saw the same thing with Emily last year, right? Where or last season, where she was really struggling that first episode, and then kind of turned it around. But generally, you can kind of see how someone is in the first episode. And I mean, that's someone who maybe you can mold, you can kind of take under your wing. And if you can offer her protection, someone who might not be as willing later on to kind of stab you in the back because she just seems so reluctant to kind of do anything or play the game or be social. So in that way, someone who's a good game player could sort of look at Jess and think, well, this is someone I can mold and take under my wing and be a good number in my alliance. So I think there's a bit more long-term value for Jess for those the other three, I guess, than Jelinski.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like you just mentioned with Emily, people can easily bounce back after one episode and can become a threat to win, like Emily. Even if you go back to like Ko Wrong with Aubrey, I forgot, had like a horrible first episode in Ko Wrong, one of our favorite seasons, and, was, dehydrated and crying. And you're like, oh my God, if the Brains tribe loses, they're going to cut Aubrey. And then obviously Aubrey bounces back tremendously, almost winning that season. So, I think Jess, the writing's not on the wall. If the Purple Tribe, Yanu, loses again, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion she goes. I think you could either be her or Banu, but like, I think she has room to grow.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess maybe before we talk about anything else, I mean, sure. What's your opinion on what Banu sort of adds to that tribe? Because, I'm curious where he fits in with them. I mean, it seems like maybe you have a clear 3-2, but at the same time, is he someone that can offer anything really? Challenges, he seems like okay. He's a person that is bubbly and will probably add something in camp life. He's one of the ones that was curious to me in terms of, I mean, obviously he fits the sort of what the producers are looking for in someone to cast these days. Does he, to you, have sort of long-term potential in the game, do you think, within this tribe dynamic?
I think Banu is somebody that should, on paper, he should get to the merge and he should provide short-term tribal phase value. Now, do I think he's going to win? I don't currently think so. I don't know how far he'll make it. I think basically based on his build, he should be able to help his tribe win challenges. I actually thought, and we'll go into this with the episode too, I was shocked that Purple lost twice. Looking at this tribe with him, with Q, with Jelinski and Tiffany, I was shocked Purple lost. And Orange blowing people away just blew me out of the water too. But I do think Banu can help his tribe. I think he could be in danger though, because you mentioned how could it be a 3-2 potentially. We see him a couple times in this episode get annoyed at Jess. And I don't want to read into the preview too much because I know the preview can mislead us and it's not always factual, but we also see him yell at Jess in the challenge again. So I don't think it's a guaranteed 3-2. I think it could be a 3-1-1, and it's going to come down to what the alliance wants to do with the two of them if they lose. But again, Banu on paper should go far to help his tribe in challenges, but if his antics get him in trouble, I could see him going soon, honestly.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a comparison to be made to like the sort of over the top, very big character, maybe like a Jam Jam, who did obviously very well. But I wonder if Banu sort of lacks the cunning and I don't know, social mobility that Jam Jam had. In terms of sort of being able to navigate being this kind of over the top character. And yeah, I don't know. I just think that to me, this tribe, as you said, doesn't appear that weak on paper in terms of challenges. So there's no reason to think they're going to go on a losing streak or anything, even though they got rid of this tall, kind of younger guy. But if they lose another challenge, lose another immunity and go back to tribal next week, I I honestly think that Banu would be in bigger trouble than Jess actually, because I think that Jess would appear to be less of a threat
I
to the
could see
three.
it. Like if this tribe ends up being, your disaster tribe, if it ends up being the Lulus, or it ends up being the 41 Green tribe, or it ends up being, Fong, any disaster tribe, I could see, them saying, well, if we're gonna keep losing anyway, us core three are gonna stay strong. Let's get cut Banu because we can't maybe trust him, and we can get rid of Jess whenever we want. So I agree with your point.
Yeah, I can't see if they go back to tribal next week. I can't see any of the three going out because I just think that they all seem, I don't know, again, like socially adept and are they all seem very strong as well in the challenges.
Mhm.
I really wouldn't want to lose any of the three as well in
I
terms of the
agree.
show as a viewer because they all have potential and I liked what I saw from them the first episode.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and you mentioned this earlier to go through the episode chronologically now. Let's talk a little bit about the opening mat chat before we get into like each of our tribes. Because I do think, to your point, I wanted to see more camp life. I do want to see more of the character moments. I do think in the premiere, they have to set up a lot of people, and they have to squeeze in their journey as they always do. But I'm hoping that next week with the hour and a half, we get a lot more of these camp stuff. But I will say, when we go through each tribe individually, I can tell you probably where every person stands alliance wise. So I do think they've done a good job with that. With
Yeah.
the newer hour and a half longer episodes, they really are showing us where each person is in the tribe, which I think is very helpful.
Yeah, and I think that was before the move to the longer episodes. That was, I know, one big complaint that I had. I think you had too. Was that
Mm,
from episode to episode, you could not follow where anything was with the shortened season in terms of days, and then just the new editing style. Like, I mean, you could not follow who was friends with who, and long term storylines basically were non-existent. So, I think the hour and a half, or I guess the 2 hour premiere, really it does offer an opportunity for them to establish where people stand with alliances. So that is a good thing. Um, but at the same time, look, I and not just the camp life. I miss the sort of fun maroonings that they used to do at the
mm.
beginning of seasons. I mean, Pearl Islands, of course, sticks out to me as a classic one. But I mean, you can't expect that every time. But just I don't know the a fun sense of adventure from the beginning. I don't know. It feels a little bit more. It's just very overproduced right from the get go, which kind of sets the tone for me. But again, that's indicative of the new era.
Yeah, I think the overproduced part is just like every premiere starts the same way, where they show up to the beach and they have a challenge right there on the beach, and it all feels very similar, as opposed to, like you just said, the Pearl Islands, like the Cook Islands, Philippines, where they're jumping off a boat, like,
Yeah,
those feel more adventurous, or even like, other seasons where they arrive on a truck or whatever. So I do hope they
yeah,
eventually change some things up if they do stay in Fiji. But you mentioned this earlier with the opening monologue, because I want to cover that and something Jeff said before we get into the tribes. You're right. Tevin is the first person ever, I believe, to do the opening monologue. The only other time somebody other than Jeff opened the season was Carolyn 2 seasons ago, where they had that fourth wall break moment where she's talking to her producer and she's being Carolyn, and that's why we both love her. Tevin is I think the only one who actually opened up with the opening monologue. So that was definitely different.
and yeah. I mean, it obviously, and I guess we'll get more into him, but like it sets up Tevin to be the season's narrator and really the biggest character instantly on the season.
Yeah.
And obviously that's done with a purpose. He really pops on the screen and had a great, I think, first episode as a character. And yeah, I mean, it's surprising and strange to not have Jeff introduce us to the season and to the cast in some ways. But look, I mean, Tevin, he's got that deep voice. He's got the, I don't know, he's a linguist. So I think it was, I didn't really mind it too much. I thought it was an interesting way to bring us in.
Yeah, I mean, like if you have a good narrator, that's a really big part of the season. So if Tevin is going to be our narrator, whether he wins or not, and he's going to be here for a long time, it's good to kind of promote him. It was only like 40 seconds as well, and then Jeff took over. But I think that was a good look into Tevin and kind of what we see later with the Orange Tribe. The one other thing I want to mention before we do get tribe by tribe, Brett, is this opening quote by Jeff, which I've seen people be very split. Some people loved it. Some people hate it. I think you didn't like it, but basically Jeff was like, look, I'm going to be honest, some of you, or at least one person here, is not going to win. Your personality is not going to get you jury votes. You're not going to win the game. You're basically going to be the 0 vote finalist, because one of my biggest problems with Survivor, and I know you love this too, the final two, ever since we've had a final three, I feel like 90% of the time, I did the math, like 90% of the time, the third place finisher gets 0 votes. It's basically a glorified final two, but he's basically talking to the Jakes, to the Romeos, to like, the Xanders, all the people who get 0 votes, saying your personality will not mesh and you will not win. And clearly he was talking about Jelinski, or maybe even someone like Liz. You didn't like this, did you?
I might surprise you by saying I don't actually mind that, because
I liked it too. I thought you didn't like it. I like it too.
Yeah, I don't know if I told you that, like, if I texted you that I didn't like it, but I guess thinking back on, maybe I did say that, I don't know, but I don't mind it, because I think that actually Jeff is telling the truth, right? Like, I mean, part of it is the fact that, well, okay, a lot of times the third place person is maybe like just a weaker game player, and like will clearly get no votes because they didn't really do much in the game. But yeah, part of it is the fact that people will rub each other the wrong way, and that is a reason why you might not win. I mean, look at Russell Hantz. He could have won twice, but he rubbed people the wrong way and he lost because of it. And that is an aspect of the game that matters and is part of it. So I don't mind Jeff saying, like, there's some of you here that might be able to go far in the game. You might be a good game player, but you won't be able to convince everyone else to give you the money. So I'm actually okay with that from Jeff. Surprisingly.
Yeah, no, I like it too. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe somebody else that I was watching texted me that, so maybe it wasn't you. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool to see Jeff just basically be like, look, he's basically saying it without saying it to the players and also the audience, is like, the social game is so important. And obviously, if your personality is one way, you're just not going to win no matter what. But, that's why the social game, you could argue, out of the three, Outwit, Outplay, Outlast, as you see on the flag there, is like the most important elements, because at the end of the day, Michelle versus Aubrey, Natalie over Russell, you could play the best game in the world, but people have to like you to give you $1 million. That's just what Survivor's always been about. So the social game is the most important. And maybe Jeff is subconsciously saying to the audience and the players, you can be ruthless, but like, if you don't mesh with the jury, nothing you do in the game is going to matter.
Yeah, I think that's what he was getting at. I mean, it's funny though, but I mean, with Jeff, there's always that element of grandstanding and sort of being hyperbolic that he likes to do, and then obviously going back, I've been watching a lot of the classic seasons, and his demeanor at Tribal and the questions he asks are much different than what they are today, and so he kind of takes on that role of, I don't know, trying to be provocative with what he says, and but I mean, I think sometimes it's interesting. And other times, I think it goes into detours that are unnecessary. But I think this was I don't know, an interesting thing to introduce to everyone right before the season. I think he's right, but in some ways, it actually is sort of preventing people from wanting to maybe be I don't know, antagonistic. So I'm not. It might have had the reverse effect of creating villains. Actually,
yeah. I mean, look. In the end, I agree with you. Whether or not a fan wants Jeff to be, that much, out in front. Like, I do appreciate him just being brutally honest, and not sugarcoating things. And obviously we see that later in the episode where he's basically just reaming Jelinski at Tribal, being like, no, let's call a spade. Like, you did quit multiple times. So I don't know that Jeff has to go over the top with things like you're saying, but like, obviously I think we both agree, him being brutally honest is, I think, kind of refreshing to see a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't mind that.
Yeah. So with the reward challenge, not that it was like overly exciting, but basically we saw, the tribes have to get the puzzle pieces, build a staircase, and retrieve their flints. And like I mentioned earlier, the orange tribes, shocking to me, Nami, was the ones that blew both other tribes out of the water. And then the green tribe, Siga. I guess I go back and forth between the colors and the names because the names all blend together at this point. But green got second, and then purple got last, meaning that green got to choose Savvy or Sweat. They chose Savvy, and purple chose Sweat. So I guess what we'll do now is go tribe by tribe, because I feel like we saw a couple interesting things from each tribe on day one.
Yeah, I guess before I even get to that, just with the challenge, I guess
Sure.
I wonder if we've ever seen that challenge before. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 20 times per season, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, I mean, I think that there was yeah, I mean, some interesting stuff. I mean, obviously when we'll get to the Savvy versus Sweat stuff, I guess at this point it's a question as to whether which one you should actually pick. I mean, in some ways, I actually think that if you have a couple of big guys or really athletic people, like the Sweat actually might be more. I don't know. Do you know the breakdown of like how many times they've won this the Sweat versus Savvy?
So yeah, I know the breakdown because I think it's actually pretty straightforward. Where like I'm pretty sure 41 to 44. I'm fairly confident that, and I can go back and look. Both tribes that had to do it completed both Savvy and
Right.
Sweat. Even though sometimes it got kind of tough, where it's like you only have one attempt at the Savvy. I think most of the time people got both
Mm.
right away. It's just that last season when they did that weird thing where both tribes had to do Savvy and Sweat combined, and I think because there was that really hard puzzle, both tribes failed the Savvy part. If you're asking me which one I would pick, I feel like I would pick Sweat because it seems much more straightforward. Obviously, the buckets with holes was a big problem this time for Q and Jelinski, but
Yeah.
Sweat is going to get done. It just comes down to how much you put into it for those several hours. But like Savvy, we've seen in this episode, it can be so convoluted and such like a weird leap in logic you have to do that you might not get it. So I feel like I would always choose Sweat, especially in a time task.
Yeah, and I think that with the Sweat test, it's much more straightforward, as you said. I think you can. You're probably going to have a couple of athletic people in your tribe that you can think will do it, and it's a lot of like heavy lifting and stuff. So like a lot of like bigger guys will be better at it. Whereas Savvy, it's like they make the from what I've seen, it's not like puzzles where you could study at home or whatever and like be good at the puzzles. Like they're very difficult, and the for example the what is it Green Siga, who they sent to do the Savvy. I mean, I don't know. It didn't seem like Ben had any idea. Like he did not seem like a puzzle person at all, and they had him on it. So I feel like it's tougher to know who should be doing the Savvy than the Sweat. The Sweat's much more straightforward about who should be doing it.
Yeah, and the thing is as well that sometimes you don't even know what the Savvy task is until you pick people. So maybe they had no way of knowing, like, maybe they had no way of knowing if Ben would be good or not. But maybe Ben's like, I'm a musician. I'm a very visual, artistic person. So if the Savvy involves like that triangle thing where you're counting triangles, maybe he would be good at it. And
Oh,
Charlie
right,
is
yeah.
and Charlie went to Harvard. So like I don't think they saw what it was before they picked people. So maybe they're thinking a very artistic person like Ben could be good here. But yeah, they both of them basically like got the numbers crossed out in the word scramble, and then we're like, we have no idea where to go from here. And then they had to again make that leap in logic to look at the remaining letters, unscramble those to then get, it was very convoluted. But I think we're both over the Savvy and Sweat at this point.
Yeah, I mean it's something that exists basically. It's not
Right.
horrible. And I guess I would say as well, just a bigger point if I can,
Sure.
that
Go.
I mean, again, I'm someone who look, I don't want to join the sort of casuals and be like, oh, we need a back to basic season, but also like it would be cool to see a back to basic season. But really the big thing is just like, I think we're past the era of true like advantage mania and twist mania. They seem to have kind of calm down with it a little bit. Like I feel like most of the I don't know twists or journeys and all this stuff is kind of so ingrained that it feels more natural now, and it's not over the top. So I wasn't distracted or annoyed by the amount of I guess advantages and idols and stuff this premiere. I don't know about you though.
No, I agree. I think I came out of this episode feeling like we've had worse. We've had people literally go on a journey and we'll get to the journey later, but like literally be forced to risk their
Yeah.
vote. Whereas this time it was like an actual game of social strategy and deceit.
Mm.
So that was better. I'm not saying I loved it, but comparing everything to a new era standpoint, that wasn't that bad. And then the only advantage this episode, other than those extra votes, was Tiffany getting her regular idol right away. So I didn't mind some of the shenanigans like I normally do. But yeah, I mean, we'll get into that as we get more into the journey on day 2. I guess to start with Siga, since we're talking about Charlie and Ben, we'll go green, I guess, then orange, then purple. So a couple alliance things, Brett, that I want to ask you about is we saw Maria and Tim make an early alliance as parents. But Maria, and who I actually was more impressed with this episode than I thought I was going to be, Maria then makes a women's alliance with Jem and Mariah to get the numbers over the guys, and they want to pull in Charlie as their fourth. So now I kind of question, does she still want to work with Tim and Ben as the odd one out? Or, if everybody likes Ben, because Ben is very social, is Tim in trouble? but Tim notices the girls are teaming up, so he wants to get the guys together. So I guess my question to you is, do you really feel like it's going to be as simple as guys versus girls, or do you feel like Charlie on the Screen Tribe is going to be a swing vote and Charlie will choose the women over the men? What do you think?
Yeah, I do think that this is. I think Charlie's going to end up being the swing vote whenever they go to tribal for the first time. I think that's pretty clear at this point already. But like you, I was definitely impressed with Maria as well. I want to say, although I do think that for me, this tribe was the least in terms of the one that sort of popped to me as like having
Yeah,
interesting
that's fair.
dynamics.
Yeah.
It was very basic. I don't know. Tim didn't pop to me as a character, and but I liked Charlie more than I thought I would. And I think he does have a certain likability that we don't see often from these like Ivy League lawyers and stuff like that are usually on the show. That I feel like come across as a very or as come across as like self-important or very smart in the game. Like he just comes across actually as very social, which is
Mhm.
why I think that he was actually able to sort of get find himself in the middle in some ways. So yeah, I think that Charlie actually had a good first episode, and yeah, like your question, I do think that he will be the swing vote when they go for the first time, and I actually do think that he'll join with the women. To be honest,
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, if you look at it from a strategy standpoint, and I know you and I love to talk, strategy when we're watching the episode, but like you could argue if the women are a tight three and we don't know how tight they are, if it's just for appearances or if they really made a strong bond, you could argue if Charlie flips to the women and he takes out either Ben or Tim, he's flipping to be at the bottom of a four, because it's obviously better to be one of three than be at the bottom of a four. And I wonder if he takes out Tim because Tim's picking up on the Women's Alliance, or Ben could, I don't think the Green Tribe's going to continue to lose, but if they did, could Charlie be the odd guy out? I don't think it's going to be that simple. And honestly, they may not even need Charlie anymore because now Maria has the extra vote and the women
right?
have the numbers over the guys now with her extra vote. So unless something happens with Jem or with Mariah themselves, I do feel like I would give the edge to the women here and Charlie being the swing vote. I think if Green loses, I easily see either Ben or Tim going out.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. It should be a pretty straightforward reading of this tribe. But I think yeah, I mean for Charlie, I agree with you in some ways that you could be at the bottom of that 4 if you do that, but honestly, I think this early in the game, I don't think there's a big risk to being, like, at the bottom of, like, a gendered alliance or something like that, just because, I mean, again, I don't think you'd expect this tribe to keep losing or anything, so if you did join them and they lost again, obviously, you would still have one other person on the other side, but I think even after that, I don't see any reason to think that that 3 of the women are really that tight right now. Like, I don't see it, and I don't think it's really a I don't think it should be a concern for Charlie in deciding which way he goes.
No, and to be honest, I mean, I think they include that every season for, optics, or they include that
Right.
for, the interesting question. But I mean, you and I would both agree, if with us being Survivor big fans, historians, like the last time a women's alliance or even a men's alliance, like an all gender alliance, has not worked in a very long time. And it's something always cracks or there's a tribe swap. So I really don't think that like it would be as clear cut. Like, I think even 43, just to go back to like a more recent example for some people, like I remember the Yellow Tribe, Baka, whatever they were called. Like I remember Mariah, ironically Mariah, Ellie, and Janine were like, "Oh, we're gonna stay girls strong," and then they wanted strength, so they cut Mariah. So it's like I don't think they'll say the word women's alliance, but I don't think it's ever going to be that straightforward.
Yeah, literally on day 1, like, you're just looking for
Any excuse.
any excuse to partner up with people. Literally, it could be I mean, I'm sure it could be on racial lines or, a couple maybe if a couple of, like, gay guys are in the same,
Or states, because we see
yeah,
Hunter and Tevin connect because they're both from Tennessee or whatever.
or they both watch the Andy Griffith Show, which we'll
Yeah,
get
oh,
into.
that's it. Yeah,
Yeah, literally anything that you can to connect with someone, you're gonna use that. So but that is the flimsiest of connections really that you can have, right? So
yeah.
it's definitely superficial. And I think we can agree that the women's alliance there is something that I don't see any long term sort of I don't see any long-term threat happening because of this of the women teaming up there.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of Tevin and Hunter, I guess we'll move over to Orange because once we go to Orange, the rest of the episode between the journey and between the tribal council is going to be all Purple and Yanu. So that's kind of where we can then end off. But with Orange, we actually got a couple interesting things here. And almost every person in this tribe was involved in an event in some way, shape, or form. The first thing we see is, Brett the classic, oh, where are you from? What do you do? And Liz kind of rubs people the wrong way by saying, I own 4 businesses. I sold 2 of them. And Tevin's like, okay, so you don't, kind of like in an old school way that you would appreciate, like, Keisha, she doesn't need the money. Like, she's just here for whatever the adventure. I'm here. I want the money. I'm gonna get rid of her. So we saw some kind of old school things here where, money or your occupations kind of playing a factor with Liz and Tevin.
Yeah, and we'll get more into Yanu as well. And then I think I was saying that Q was sort of old school in his mentality of like, the weak have to go sort of thing, right? So we did see I think some people that had these sort of old school ways of thinking of like, yeah, like I'm here for the money, like you don't need the money, like that's a reason to get you out. That's like why would you say that? Like that's a reason that we're gonna get rid of you. Yeah, I mean, as someone who in our draft that we were talking about that got Liz, I'm not going to reveal when I got Liz in the draft, but from what I noticed immediately is that yeah, I think she does lack the awareness of how she's coming across to the rest of the tribe, and Tevin, as the narrator, just does a great job of explaining that to the audience of like saying that sort of comment out here is going to cost you the game because you're saying that you don't need the money, that you don't need to be here, that you're not going to be ruthless either. I mean, that's basically what you're saying because what does the game even mean to you then?
Right. And look, I mean, you mentioned Emily earlier when we were talking about when Jeff was saying somebody can't win, or like we were saying how Jess can bounce back. Like, look, I mean, Liz could have an Emily episode 1 where she's kind of ostracizing some people and people are getting rubbed the wrong way by her, but she could easily bounce back if somebody wants to pick her up. But I do agree the most important trait, if someone were to ask me what's the most important trait to have in Survivor, I think it's self-awareness, not just how you come across to other people, but maybe you're standing in the game. So Liz will have to channel that and become more aware of how she's coming off to people. If Tevin's rubbed the wrong way, Tevin's aligned with Hunter and with Soda. I think if Orange loses as we go more through this tribe, I think if Orange loses, it's either going to be Liz or Randon, and I don't think it's close.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe Venus, but I really think Liz and Randon are in the worst spots here.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a very interesting tribe dynamic. I think much more so than Green, as we were talking about. But yeah, I mean, Liz just appears to be the sort of weakest socially, and maybe in terms of challenges, I'm not sure. I mean, they did very well in the challenges, so who knows? Obviously, we have to see who would cost them a challenge if they were to lose or something. But yeah, I mean, I think that Liz definitely just wasn't understanding the social dynamics necessary to kind of establishing herself in the tribe. And someone I think as adept in terms of picking up those cues as Tevin, it's going to be trouble for her. Because I do think that Tevin is going to find himself as really the decision maker of the tribe. I have a feeling that's going to happen. I mean, Soda is sort of like the loudest, but I think Tevin is going to be the one pulling the strings in that tribe, at least in the first vote, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we see Tevin connect with Hunter as they make the Andy Griffith alliance, and we also see Tevin connect with Soda. I think Tevin is probably in the best spot in this tribe. I think he'll go far because he does seem to be covered by each and every person here, and I think he will contribute in challenges as well. So I have no worries for Tevin. And like we mentioned, Hunter and Tevin. Go ahead.
I do have to ask. It's a sort of superficial thing, but what do you think of the kind of goofy like Andy Griffith, black and white sort of editing, like these sort of, I don't know, they've done it before where it's worked and sometimes it doesn't work in these new era seasons. Like I forget where it was. You would remember better than me. But there was the one with that one alliance where, no, it was when the guys, it was like some boys' night thing where they were like playing music. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that was last season where all the women went on a reward and the guys were at camp and they played like a 80s or 90s like guys thing or whatever.
Right. Girls just want to have fun, but guys version.
Yeah.
What do you think of that in terms of like them including this sort of, I don't know, it is very Big Brothery in terms of like the editing style. Do Do you mind? Because for me, like I like love the sort of like original like Borneo style, like very raw documentary style kind of editing. I mean, is this too much for you, or is it if it's not done too much that it's okay?
I would say if it's not done too much, it's okay. Like obviously, it was on the screen for like 5 seconds. I didn't really mind it. I thought it was kind of a kitschy little thing. But like, if this alliance goes far and Hunter and Tevin become like, I don't know, like the Dom and Wendell, and like they're just cutting people left and right, and like every time they talk strategy, the little like black and white scroll comes up. I'll get if it becomes like a running gag, I'm not going to
Yeah.
like it, but every now and then I don't mind them trying out something unique and new. I think it's kind of interesting.
That's fair.
But
So I
yeah,
just
I mean,
wanted
I
to go
think
that detour because I was like, I don't know what you think of these sort of things, but it is a
okay.
very different style of editing that we did not get for 30 plus seasons of the show.
I think what we would both agree with is that as some people who have gotten a bit tired of the backstories, I think I would rather see them try unique things like this as opposed to the backstories
Yeah,
at the very least.
I would agree. And actually, I think that was something also interesting is that, again, sorry, detour, but
No, you're fine. Go.
um, that we didn't really get too many like big sob stories. I mean, I know that they've been kind of waiting. They've been sparsing them out like through the episodes in the past couple seasons, but it did seem like maybe a little bit less of going into that. It was very quick sort of backstories when they were being introduced, but we didn't really get too many of those this episode. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for early on, I think it was literally just but I think like Banu, Jess, I think like it happened like twice early on, and I think if you count it out, it's maybe like 3 or 4 seconds on the screen. Like it's not that quick, but no, I do think they've done a better job lately of sparsing them out. Or there's even been like stretches where you'll have like 3 episodes in a row where you won't get a single backstory. So they're gonna include them because I know Jeff and production love them, but I do think they've gotten better at like weaving them in rather than just kind of throwing it in our face.
Yeah, which I know was, for me, I've always said, and I've said to you multiple times that the season 41 premiere is the worst episode in Survivor history. And part of that was the way that they were dumping the backstories and all of the editing styles all at once, just sort of into it, and us having to adapt to it. As you said, they're doing a better job, I think, of weaving in, like as I said, the Andy Griffith editing and the backstories to where it's not distracting, I think, in a way that the early sort of new era style of editing was. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think they've done a better job at that. And then the last thing that we see on the Orange Nami tribe before we spend probably the rest of the episode on Purple and the journey is, Venus kind of, I don't know who first says it, but she kind of gets labeled as like a princess a little bit. And then she's like, well,
It
no,
was
I'm going
Tevin.
to
It
kind
was
of,
Tevin.
who was it?
It was Tevin that said it.
Okay, so Tevin maybe in like a joking or a
Yeah.
serious manner was like, hey, the princess, which she's like, I got to overcome that first impression. So she goes to look for an idol in case she's in trouble. Randon kind of walks up on her and sees her searching, and he tells Soda, hey, she's looking for an idol. She's like Parvati Lights because she's smart and she's hot. So she's going to be a big problem. But Soda's like, yeah, I don't really care. I don't really trust you, Randon. So I'm going to go tell Venus what you just said. And now Venus kind of is in a little bit of a better spot because now Randon kind of dug himself a little bit of a hole here.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because I mean, as someone who also drafted Venus, and I do like Venus as a character so far, and I do want to see her stay in the game. I mean, I think that Randon is kind of right about her. I mean, okay, there's this natural disposition to be like, okay, this young and hot girl who seems kind of like socially adept it just literally is Parvati. It's so you know obvious to do, and it's sort of unfair. But I mean, this is kind of the way that she's portraying herself, or wants to be portrayed as like a Parvati style villain, right? I mean, this is what she mentioned in her pregame interview. So I don't think Randon's really wrong in saying like she actually is kind of dangerous in the way that she is searching for idols and kind of going to be ruthless in the game. I think he actually has a correct read on her, but maybe going to Soda with that information was not the best thing to do.
I completely agree with you. I think it really is ideation versus execution. I think you're completely right. That I think Randon is correct that Venus is somebody who, I mentioned this to you when you drafted her, is somebody who has very high variance where she's got to survive the first few votes because she could be in trouble. But if you let her get too far, like Parvati, she's going to ingrain herself, make an alliance, and she's going to go very far. So he's correct that you have to keep your eyes out for Venus. You can't just, let her skate by. But I think the execution is bad because him going to Soda, it really puts him in a bad spot here because now Soda and Venus are against him. If Soda's aligned with Tevin and Hunter, Randon could easily be voted out over even Liz. I think the biggest problem for Randon here is like on Survivor, like we said earlier, and you mentioned this too with the Green Girls Alliance, people are looking for any reason or any excuse to team up, and they're also looking for any reason or excuse to not be the first voted out. And I think that, you really should not say a name in Survivor. In my opinion, you can tell me your thoughts as a big fan too. The only reason you should throw out someone's name this early on is if you're talking to your number one. Like if Tevin's talking to Hunter or, Q is talking to Tiffany and Kenzie, then you can say a name. If you're going to Soda, who you haven't really built a rapport with yet, and you're just throwing out Venus, it's going to look really shady on you that you're throwing out names already. And now you can just go around to everyone and say, hey, Randon's throwing people under the bus already. This happened also, I think, in Game Changers, where Sierra was like, hey, let's get Michaela out first. And Malcolm's like, we're on day 2 and you're already throwing names out here. So I think you can't throw out a name and you should just let the names come to you unless you're working with like a really tight alliance member. I think that was Randon's biggest mistake.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, and this is something that I think we've actually seen a lot of in the past couple of seasons of Survivor, despite people, them casting more super fans than ever. It's people who just can't keep their mouth shut. And I think, the power of sort of holding on to information and just being perceptive of how people are playing and not needing to rush to tell people. There's, as you were saying, there's really no benefit to telling Soda from Randon. I mean, maybe he could view it as a way to bring them together, that he has, a bit of information. But as you said, we as the viewer, we didn't get any indication that they were friendly or working together in any way. So it does just appear at him to sort of be like a rat that will kind of rat out on anyone and, throw anyone under the bus. And I guess Soda did pick up on that. So I think that it was definitely a big mistake from Randon actually early on. And it's something that, if you're going to play Survivor, if you are a super fan and you are, signing up to play, you have to go over there understanding that you have to keep your mouth shut with information sometimes. And this was the first indication that he can't do that.
Brett, I told you during the draft, there's a reason why his kids were throwing him a first boot party. So, I mean, he wasn't the first boot, but I could easily see him being the first out of this tribe.
Yeah, and he seemed a little bit under-edited as well. Like, I just, if we're kind of looking into the edit, and maybe we could go in towards the end of the episode about, like, who we think is looking like has, like, a winner's edit or just making predictions based on the edits. Like, to me, he's one of the obvious ones, and Liz as well, that just were very under-edited, or there's nothing to pick up on that's saying that he's going far in the game. The only thing that he had shown of him in this episode was him making a crucial social mistake.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like for you and I as big fans, it's kind of like a blessing and a curse because we know the edits so well at this point that even though they sometimes can trick us, we kind of know that like you're always showing us stuff for a reason. Like even the little things where it's like a normal fan wouldn't pick up that they're constantly showing Carson making fire, and then that's foreshadowing Carson kind of losing in fire in 44. So it's like they're always going to show you things or not show you things for a reason. So we can easily read into the fact that Randon is getting shown this because it's like he's really making social missteps early. That's going to pay bad dividends going forward.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I don't know if you want to say last thing on this tribe or if you had anything else to talk about, but I mean, what was your perception of Soda in this episode? Because she really was a much bigger character than I thought she was going to be. I mean, she was singing, she was dancing, or I don't know if she was dancing, but she was singing the camp songs that Hunter didn't like.
Yeah.
And she, was seemingly organizing, I guess social aspects of the tribe. I know she was seemingly getting along with everyone. And she actually was very strong in challenges, it seemed as well. Very strong. So does she emerge for you as a real contender in this season based on this episode?
Yeah, no, I do think Soda could be a contender. When we're talking about people that we are walking away from with, winners edits or people that their stock is going up versus people whose stock is going down. I think, her stock is up for me. I did not expect her to be as big of a character. I actually was worried for her at first because on the mat when she was, laughing and making the Nami jokes, like Venus was giving her the side eye. So I was like, oh, could Soda get herself in trouble? But she seems to have positioned herself well with Tevin and with Hunter. And I think Soda is insulated at the moment. And I also think that, she's already clocked Randon as somebody who is not to be trusted. So I went in with different expectations, but I think Soda could be trending up potentially.
And yeah, I agree with you that, Hunter and Tevin are very well placed there, and Soda I think is well placed as well. The other three, just for various reasons, sort of Randon maybe being perceived as a bad social player, or Liz just sort of isolating herself, or Venus as like a kind of threat, are most at threat of leaving when they first go to tribal, but we'll see. But
Yeah, no, I mean,
they look. I mean, we'll get into the I guess immunity challenge, but this tribe does look pretty strong in challenges, and yeah, they might not lose for a while actually.
I actually agree. I did not see it coming. But I think basically we have two more things to talk about with the episode. Really, it's basically the rest of the stuff that happens on the Purple Yanu tribe, and then of course we could talk a little bit about the journey because we kind of already covered earlier the decision between Jess versus Jelinski.
Yeah,
You mentioned this earlier too, Brett, when you talked about Q and Jelinski doing the sweat task and Jelinski quitting. You had pointed out like, is sweat even worth it for like a pot and a machete? You're going to get it after the first challenge anyway. Maybe you should just save your strength for the challenge. And I kind of agree. Like they kind of overblow sweat and savvy. And I think you should really keep your strength for the challenge. I don't really blame Jelinski and Q for quitting it. I think going
right.
back to the whole idea versus execution, I think Jelinski has to realize an ex-college quarterback in Q is not going to take it lightly that you quit the very first challenge on his team and then furthermore then quit the journey task as well. So while I see why they would want to save their strength for the challenge, as it was a very physical challenge, I think Jelinski quitting with Q was just probably the worst case scenario for him as well.
Yeah, and I think it's I don't know if it's even just that like oh he was a former college quarterback. It's just that you have to be able to read people, and
Yeah.
if Jelinski could read, if he could have read Q better, you could see that this is a guy who is not going to take quitting lightly or did not want to quit that challenge. That's why I think I texted you that Q sort of reminds me of Frank from Africa in that he has this very like military-ish kind of like no quitters, no, I don't want weakness on my team, which I appreciate that sort of old school mentality. Um, and I think that this is maybe where the immaturity of Jelinski was seen, where he just couldn't read that even if they, they clearly had no chance of finishing, that if he really wanted to build something with Q, he needed to keep going in that challenge.
Yeah, I think it just kind of just kept snowballing for him, where he had to read the room better with Q. He comes back from the journey, he misreads people, and I just think that misreading of people, and Jelinski did this, Liz did this, Randon did this. We kind of been saying it all podcasts. Like you have to have the self awareness, and you have to be able to read people. And if you can't read people, you're going to be that person that Jeff said earlier, where it's like you're not going to win no matter what.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And no, I mean, we'll get into more things about how Jelinski was messed up in this in this episode. That was just one of many.
Yeah, well, let's talk about one right now. Because I know we are 58 minutes in, so I guess we can just talk about the journey, the challenge, and then we can kind of wrap
Oh, wait,
things up.
sorry, interrupt. By the way, one thing? What did you think of Jelinski destroying the production equipment? Like
Oh, I
him
loved
throwing
it.
the hourglass.
Oh, I loved it. I guarantee you, production didn't love it, especially the production member that had to go pick up glass from the beach. I loved it. I thought it was almost a metaphor. Like we all hated the hourglass. At least Jeff has admitted like the hourglass was a very bad idea, and I'm glad he did. But it was
Oh,
almost symbolic. I wish the hourglass smashes the new era. It's not going to be the case, but I really did love Jelinski just yeeting and talking to hour. I thought it was great.
yeah, I agree. That was pretty funny. But you know, they probably didn't like it right away, but then like they were able to get like the visual of it cracking in the sand and like, oh yeah, it was probably pretty. It was worth it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, what would have really pissed off production is if they start the task and they're like, nah, let's just save our strength, and they immediately just like push it off the pedestal. Like that would have really pissed off production.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So one thing that you mentioned Jelinski did quit was the journey. So let's talk about that for a second. So as always, we have to have a journey like every third episode in the new era, but basically three people go to the journey, which is Jelinski, Maria, and Tevin. By the way, quick side note, let me ask you a quick question. You would never volunteer for a journey, right? Because I feel like with me personally, seeing what I've seen, I don't want to be away from my tribe, and I feel like you can lose your vote. I will never volunteer for a journey, so I don't know why Jelinski would volunteer here.
Yeah, I think unless it was like later in the season and you really fell in the outs and you were desperate for anything, maybe you would be willing to do it. But yeah, I mean, I think otherwise it makes you seem like a game player to everyone else. I mean, I wouldn't even mind going if it was random. Like if I'm one of the people that were randomly selected, I'd be like, all right, maybe I could get something out of this. And you just seem like, well, you have to go along with it, right? But like for
Mhm.
him to so outwardly say that he wants to do it, uh, again, after already kind of being negatively perceived by his tribe for quitting in the first challenge or in the sweat challenge, I think it was a big mistake. Even just
I,
going on
I
I
agree.
think even going on the journey was a mistake.
Yeah, you're right because we saw with Maria and Tevin, they like rolled the shot in the dark, or they like did like the fingers, like they randomly did it. If you get randomly chosen, that's luck of the draw. It is what it is. But yeah, I'm never putting my hand up to go.
Yeah, you know, I agree. So I mean, you said that you thought you didn't mind the kind of game they played at the journey this time.
Yeah, again, look, we both want back to basics. Like, I don't want any journey, but if I'm going to get a journey and I'm going to compare it to all the journeys in the past where it's like I'm going to risk my vote, I'm going to gamble my vote, I'm going to get an advantage that lets me steal an advantage. Like, out of all the journeys we've gotten, this was probably one of the least egregious to me because I like you like social strategy. We want touchy subjects to come back as a reward challenge. We like seeing people have to interact and kind of say what they think of people and whatnot. So when you give me a task where you have like a torch, a skull, and a vote, and the one person that gets like the torch or whatever it is like, I got to decide who has the vote and who's lying to me. I don't mind it overall. What did you think?
Yeah, I didn't mind it, and I think that although what sort of made it for me was because Tevin was so theatrical throughout the whole episode, but he's such an actor. Like you would actually know this guy's an actor without even knowing.
Mhm.
Uh, what's funny is that yeah, you know, he really came across like he was lying actually because he's just so theatrical about everything. And he said that he had the fire or whatever. Um, sorry, what do you have he had the fire, right? Or
Maria had the torch.
what do you have?
Kevin had the vote, and then
The
Jonesy had the
vote.
skull.
Yeah, the vote. But it seemed like he was actually lying to me because he was so theatrical and over the top. But you know, Jelinski then blew it after that. But I guess Maria was sort of played it pretty well. I guess I would say, right?
I think Maria did a great job, and this is one of the. I mean, obviously, she impressed me right away when she was carrying the freaking puzzle piece on her back like
Yeah.
this. But no, she really impressed me here, where she basically kind of, I don't want to say breaks the challenge, but basically she's like, "Hey, look, I'm a mom. Jelinski, you're 22. I'm 45. I'm going to give you another chance because I trust you a little bit less than Tevin right now. And if you're lying to me, I'm going to go back and tell everybody that you can't be trusted in the game." And Jelinski's like, well, crap. I can either, keep going and risk my vote and like everybody in the game hating me already, or I can like maybe build some goodwill with her and lose my vote anyway. And I think he just completely caved under the pressure. Maybe it was like the mom pressure, but like I think Maria did handle that pretty well. And now she not only has an extra vote, but she has a pretty good read on Jelinski as well, because now she knows, even though he gave in to me, like I can't trust him.
Yeah, and like I mean, it showed that he was super weak. But I actually loved the sort of scene after when he goes back and
Yeah.
explains everything to the tribe, and they're literally just like, "You fool! Like you just why would you do that?" Like just completely shaming him. Like there was no sympathy to what he did at all. It was every single person was like, "What is wrong with you?"
Because they were like, basically, dude, yeah, you don't want to, get us in trouble where like, people don't trust you going forward, but like you gave Tevin and Maria extra votes. So you not only lost your vote for us, and obviously I'm sure the alliance of, him, Q, Tiffany and Kenzie were the most mad, of course, but like you not only hurt our alliance by losing your vote, you also gave the other tribes extra votes. So you hurt us and you helped them, which is the worst thing you can do.
Do you think that Jelinski should have tried to, I don't know, play it off in a different kind of way? Like that. I mean, of course, they're going to find out, I guess, what happens at some point later on anyway, but like, could he have done or said something to maybe save himself in that moment a little better than how he told them the information?
So you're saying like he lies at the journey, he
Mm,
comes clean, and then what does he say when he comes back?
yeah, like, yeah, when he came back to the tribe, could he have, I don't know, framed it in a different way to make it a little better for him?
I mean, you're right. I mean, if Maria is still in the game when she interacts with Purple Tribe people
Right.
later, they'll find out the truth. But I guess in the meantime, like if you're Jelinski, like you can try to do your best and just be like, look, we were forced to play a game of deceit. I was forced by the skull cards to lie about my thing, and Maria just
Right.
trusted.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. She didn't trust me. She trusted Tevin. I had to play the role that I was given, and like that's all it is. I
Well, to
personally
not say
think
you gave up, just to be like, she chose, the correct one, and but unfortunately, I lost my vote because of that. Should he have picked up on the fact that he shouldn't have said that he just gave up?
I agree because you already gave up at the sweat,
Yep.
so you are only further confirming to Q and to the other people you will fold at any task you're given, and they can't really trust you. So to me, this was the nail in the coffin. Him quitting sweat was like whatever. Him then quitting basically this and caving again really sealed his fate. I mean, the puzzle put it over the edge. But like this really just made him persona non grata to the rest of his tribe.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that yeah, he did sort of seal his fate there, and that's why I think later in the episode, I think it was so clear to me that he was going because all the signs were there.
Yeah.
So do you want to get into, I guess, maybe other aspects of this tribe before the immunity challenge of Tiffany sort of finding the idol clue thing?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Later?
those are the last two things that I want to discuss. I know we're at an hour seven, and I want to just be mindful of people's time. So like, I think we'll talk about the challenge itself, and then we'll talk about Tiffany's idol, and then I think we can basically wrap it up. And if anyone has any questions in the chat, you can put it in now. I see Jay submitted one or two questions. But yeah, so basically before the challenge, Tiffany and Kenzie find the Beware advantage, and basically Tiffany opens it up and she realizes, I can't get the next step of this without losing the next challenge, and I can't vote until then, which in the end, I didn't mind this because she got it back right away. So I was like, whatever, it kind of was a moot point, but it almost feels pointless to me, Brett, because you can't vote until your tribal loses and you can proceed, but you won't go to tribal if your team doesn't lose. I feel like this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it definitely was a bit of a confusing setup for because yeah, as you said, like, there was really like she was always going to have the opportunity to get the idol, right?
Right.
Because they
Yeah.
had to lose before tribal. So uh yeah, that was kind of needlessly thrown in there, I guess, in some ways. But I guess it was still impressive how she was really able to find the idol and get the idol in the episode one. I think it showed a lot from her.
I was very impressed with Tiffany this episode. I do have her in our draft, and I do worry like when you see someone this prominently this early. I don't know if they're gonna win, but I did like what I saw from her on Wednesday. Because you're right, Brett. Not only do they lose the challenge, but she gets the clue, and it's a cipher puzzle where you basically have these symbols. You're not given like any hints of what these symbols are. You have to crack it, and the fact that basically from the tribe loss to the tribal council in that time span, she not only cracked the code, but got the idol and, you know, is now has a vote. It was extremely impressive. I think the key for her was like she figured out the three-letter word was like and then she basically used that to get the other letters and get like A and stuff. So I was very impressed by Tiffany solving the cipher and getting the idol.
Yeah, for sure. And I forget because I forget from the episode, but did she? She did tell Kenzie that she got the idol, right?
She told Kenzie for sure. I don't know. I think she might have told Q. I think Q, Kenzie, and Tiffany know. And it's funny because I picked Tiffany, Brett, because not only it's ironic because I thought she was, a really possibly great social player. She said in the preseason she wasn't going to tell anybody about advantages, and at first I was like, "Why did you immediately tell somebody?" But then I was like, "Well, to be fair, because we don't see everything, maybe she and Kenzie are looking together." To me, nothing looks worse than you finding it. Somebody sees you find it and then you don't tell them. That looks the most shady of all. So, like, I don't know if, Tiffany's looking at the rocks. She picks it up and then she's like, well, Kenzie's right behind me. I have to go tell her because if she sees me walk away with it, put it in my pants, then she looks even more shady. So, yeah, I mean, Jay mentions in the chat, like, Kenzie, I think, was right there when she found it. So I do think Tiffany is a player who will keep some secrets, but like if your number one is right behind you and you're looking for an idol, I can see why she told her, but I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, I think it seemed like she was right there, I guess, and she kind of had to. But I think that it makes sense for her because I think those two, as we said, plus Q can definitely be actually a very strong alliance going forward. And I think they have a sort of similar mindset on the game. They both seem like gamers. So I think that I actually I do think it makes sense. I forget if she was right there, but I think that it makes sense for Tiffany to let Kenzie in on it. I don't think there was any downside to that.
I think it could have been a lot worse. It could have been like a Randon and Venus situation where somebody that you don't trust sees you get the idol. But if it's your number one, I don't have a big problem with it. I think you and I both wish we lived in an era where people don't tell people things. But like I've also seen some other podcasts where people say like, well, especially in this new era, people like you sharing things with them, and it really builds trust. So I can see also why Tiffany did it.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess we should we talk about the immunity challenge and what we thought of that?
Yeah,
Or
I think that's the last thing I want to cover, unless you have anything else. Is basically just the challenge.
yeah, I guess yeah, at Yanu there wasn't too much else besides what we already spoke about, right? Jess
Yeah,
struggling to fit in with the tribe dynamic, and that seems like it'll be a longer term storyline with her. And there is sort of maybe room for like a growth arc, right, or a redemption edit for her to sort of like her ingraining herself in the tribe. I could see that happening. As I said, I think if they were to go back to tribal again, I actually think in some ways Banu would be in more trouble than her. I think that we could see a sort of redemption edit for her in terms of social ability throughout the season.
yeah. I think we said it earlier. I think Jess can bounce back. I mean, she's gotten less sleep. Maybe she's getting used to the environment. The rain, the lack of sleep. If she does have ADHD and she's getting used to not having her typical surroundings. Like, I mean, I think she can easily bounce back. Kind of like I said earlier, how Aubrey had like 2 days of dehydration, then she bounced back. So I think it's not too late for Jess.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So the immunity challenge, Brett, I kind of like this. I know we have said in the past, kind of like with the opening challenge, where we've seen the same thing a million times, but you give me them dragging a giant stuffed gecko through a course. Because, usually when they drag something, it's usually like, oh, let's just drag a snake. But you give me a giant stuffed gecko and them having to drag that through a course. I thought it was fun. It was very like Gulliver's Travels, or very like, I'm trying to think of like something else. So like kind of like that esque.
Yeah, like I guess I just like the visual of it was pretty funny, right? So I agree that I thought that although of course it's like the same type of challenge, it's always the same type of challenge. Like I want weird challenges back that's a bit more goofy or even like trivia based or stuff like something random like that we saw in the early seasons would be awesome to see once or twice every now and then. But yeah, I mean if we're gonna do the same kind of challenge, like yeah, just why not have a 500-pound gecko that you have to traverse through everything. But yeah, I thought it was really fun, and yeah, I think the big thing and the big takeaway that we mentioned before is just how strong the Orange Tribe seemed, and someone like Tevin, who you wouldn't maybe expect to be a challenge beast, like looked like really strong in there, and looks like a tribe without a lot of weakness in terms of physical challenges.
Yeah, I'll put my hand up and admit that I was wrong. And I've in this new era, I've been right sometimes and I've been wrong other times. And I thought for sure, I said this during our draft, I thought the Green Tribe was the most not weak. I thought the Green Tribe was going to struggle for me because, you know, you have Ben, Charlie, and Tim as the guys. And I mean, Maria is obviously a beast. I didn't expect that, but Maria, Mariah, and Jem, I thought Green was going to struggle the most. I'm like, Purple has Q, Banu, and Jelinski. They're going to be fine. Orange has Hunter, Tevin, and Randon. They'll be fine. But I didn't see Orange being that dominant, and B, I didn't see Purple being that bad. So yeah, that was surprising to me.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like on the puzzles as well, Venus did well, which was nice. But I guess, you know, with so much of it coming down to the puzzles, and that was the big problem for Purple, was that Jelinski was a mess on the puzzles, and Jess was a mess on the puzzle as well. So, you know, that's what it often comes down to. But I guess even before that, as you said, it was basically wire to wire, right? Like Orange was winning these challenges, both challenges, wire to wire, basically so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, we're only 2 challenges in. There's still plenty of time before we merge. Obviously, we're going to have at least another 4 or 5 episodes before we merge. And maybe there's a water challenge, or maybe there's a dexterity or balance challenge. Like, there could be plenty of challenges where Orange could struggle, but right now they seem very well-rounded.
Yeah, I think that it'll be interesting to see, you know, Jelinski going. It's, you know, I know he struggled, but he is a large guy. I mean, is that going to impact them in the future challenges? It could. I mean, I think I could definitely see Purple losing another challenge. You know, I guess we have seen those sort of tribes that look very strong on paper struggle in the challenges historically. I know you'd be able to come up with those maybe off the top of your head, but I think it's something that we do see every once in a while where it looks like, oh, there's all these younger guys and strong guys, but then they struggle. And we saw that here this first episode.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think also the thing, and then we can get to questions unless you have something else, is basically, you know, the other, you know, factor is that finally in the new era, we had a tribe swap in 45 after 4 seasons of no swaps. And I would be surprised if we didn't get one this season. I think they usually copy back-to-back seasons. So I think we will have a tribe swap. So I think also, even if Orange dominates for 2-3 episodes, we could see a reshuffling that would really shake everything up in a few episodes, maybe.
Yeah, and that would be good to see. As you said, you know, we like the tribe swaps, and you know, a couple episodes in, after relationships have really been established, for us to get a tribe swap would be interesting. I mean, is there anyone that appears to you as like competition beast potentially, like looking ahead towards merge and like individual challenges? Is there anyone that really stands out to you, or no?
It's a good question, because I think it's still too soon to tell. I mean, if you told me in last season 45 in the tribe format, if you told me in the merge we're going to have 2 or 3 showdowns between Bruce and Julie, and they're going to be the challenge beasts, I would have said you're crazy. The 2 oldest people being challenge beasts. If I had to give you a name, right,
Joe obviously being the challenge beast, like on multiple seasons, or, you know, like it's, I don't know if are we seeing that, like maybe Q.
Well, you know what's funny? I actually don't think Q, because in my opinion, I think people overblow physical threats. I think people are like, oh, the big physical guy, we can't let him get to merge. I feel like the challenges in the pre-merge are way more physical, and then you get to the merge, and it's all about balance, about dexterity, about puzzles. So I would not be scared of Q at merge, honestly, unless he's great at puzzles. I think I would be more scared of honestly,
Venus, those sort of like smaller girls that can
Venus for sure. Honestly, somebody like, and this is, I think someone like Banu. I mean, I don't know if Banu will get to merge, but like if he does, somebody who's a athletic guy but who isn't as like buff physically, like I could see Banu like maybe being like a sneaky, like Banu could be like a Tyson or someone like who's good at everything, but he doesn't like physically seem good at everything. I think that could be a scary person too.
Yeah, for sure. And it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I guess so obviously we know who wins the green and orange win immunities, and so we have purple going to tribal. And I guess if you want to talk a little bit just about like what we saw going into tribal, you know, obviously there was just the question of whether it would be Jelinski or Jess. It was very clear. You know, do you think that Jelinski should have perceived that he was in more trouble than he was, or no?
I think he should have. I think, you know, it was a bad look for him. And again, we don't see everything. He could have been talking to Kenzie or talking to Tiffany, but like it was a bad look in the episode for him to get back to camp. He's sitting in the shelter with Jess and he's letting the alliance go off and decide his fate. I think he really should have not been complacent, and he should have went with them and been like, all right, guys, we're the alliance. Are we taking out Jess or Banu tonight? Rather, he lets them go off and lets them basically be like, look, we can't keep Jelinsky any longer. So I think he really misinterpreted his standing in the tribe.
Yeah, and I mean, the difference is that I guess they had established some sort of alliance. Like he maybe had the ability to kind of, argue for himself, right? Whereas like Jess really was on the bottom, and besides maybe idle scrambling, had really nothing. I don't think that she had much that she could actually do. She knew it was kind of out of her hands, whereas Jelinsky maybe could have fought for himself, but instead was just, yeah, as you said, very casual about his chances of going. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's probably why he deserved to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. Honestly, I think, he had chances to save himself and, he didn't take advantage of them.
Yeah. And so then I guess, I mean, there really wasn't too much, I guess, pre-tribal at the tribe. And so then we get to tribal, and there's the whole thing, as you mentioned earlier, about Jeff calling out Jelinsky for quitting, and then not being able to admit that he quit multiple times in that episode. So that I feel like that was the big story at tribal, and really not too much else happened that was too interesting.
Yeah, tribal was very straightforward. Like, you always could think, like, are they giving us a red herring? Is like this all about Jelinsky and Jess gets taken out and we're like shocked as an audience? But no, it was very heavy handed. Like, Jelinsky's going to go home. And then the whole thing where Jeff was like, is there anything else? And Banu's like, I think it's time to vote. It's like, well, it's a wrap at that point. So they really hammered you over the head with like, this was Jelinsky's 1 episode arc. He did it to himself. And Jeff was like, I'm not going to let you off the hook if you quit everything.
Yeah, the only thing was, I guess I forget if I'm not making this up, I don't think, is that Banu say a couple times in the episode that like, oh, he liked Jelinsky, like he's a nice kid and sort of thing. So like they kind of, it seemed like Q obviously was pushing for Jelinsky to go, but the opposition to that was actually coming more from Banu, it seemed, right? Like that Banu wanted Jess more to go, it seemed, or that he didn't want Jelinsky to go. Didn't he? He indicated that, no?
Yeah, so Banu basically, and it's funny, Jelinsky actually said this in his exit press, because I like to also see what people are saying afterwards. Now, maybe it's not all factual, but like it gives me a bit more color to the episode. We see in the episode, like you said, Jelinsky, Banu's like, I like Jelinsky, he's a good kid. I like Jelinsky. I think, he could help us. But one thing we didn't see in the episode was basically when Banu's doing that whole thing where he's like, Jeff, I like him, but it's time to vote. The one thing we didn't see, apparently, according to Jelinsky, was Banu goes, he's a good kid, I like him, but I can't do this anymore. And I don't know if that was intentional or that was a Freudian slip, but clearly Banu's like, I want to keep him, but like he's giving me no reason to do so. So his fate was basically done at that point.
Oh, so at tribal, Banu said, I can't do it anymore?
According to Jelinsky. Now, obviously you can take exit interviews as factual or as, rewriting history based on who it is. But according to Jelinsky, that's what was said.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting about, I don't know. I mean, that seems like really a big slip from Banu.
If it's true, it's a slip. Yeah.
Which I wouldn't be too surprised with. I feel like Banu is going to give us that sort of messiness at tribal at times. You could see that with his character. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I think Banu, if he were to be a very steady player, I think he's physical enough to get to merge, but I could see him putting his foot in his mouth and, saving himself. Jeff's could be saved over him maybe. So.
Yeah. And like I said, so as you said, very straightforward vote, right? 5-0, nothing too shocking, no interesting plays. And he couldn't even play shot in the dark, right? So it was, there was really nothing to do.
Yeah.
Here. So do we have some sort of, final thoughts on the episode or thoughts going forward, or?
Yeah, we can give some final thoughts on the episode, and then maybe I'll pull up like one question just to answer what Jay's put in the chat. But yeah, overall thoughts on the episode. I thought it was an overall good episode, more than we thought, basically what we thought with the cast and also what we thought with maybe how advantage heavy it could be. Better than expected. I think there's potential here. We listed a lot of great players and characters like Tevin and Venus as potential, and Soda for Orange. And we mentioned the Q, Tiff, and Kenzie alliance, and then Maria kind of running things on green. So I think there's a lot of potential for some good players, and I hope we're in for a good season.
Yeah, I thought I don't know if I was as enthusiastic about the episode as you. I thought it was a fairly average new era premiere. As I said, I was disappointed by I think like a lack of
Camp.
survival scenes. I think they did a decent job, as you said, establishing like the alliances and the characters of the season. There were some fun moments as well, like the Andy Griffith stuff. The gecko. I did like the gecko. And Jelinski had an interesting kind of episode one flame out, as you said, that we don't see too often. Um, but I do think that, again, some of the editing styles are still there that I'm not crazy about. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a kind of fairly average new era premiere. But as you said, like there are some very interesting characters and maybe gamers that we'll see hopefully throughout the season. So I think there's some promise for sure. Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm interested in seeing where characters like Tevin and Venus and Tiffany, Maria go, for the
Yeah.
rest of the season. But I think there are some duds in the cast as well. Like I think I was saying this to you when I was texting you. Like Mariah and Liz seem to occupy like a very similar lane to me, where they even look kind of similar. Where I was actually I couldn't tell who. I
Yeah.
honestly am struggling to who is who, and especially Liz to me. I don't want to jump all over her, sorry, but I'm curious as to why she was cast. I don't understand. Like to me, she's someone like why was she cast? She doesn't seem very strong in challenges, particularly socially. She seems like she struggles. Um, I don't really get that why she was cast. I don't know. There's a couple of people like that where I'm curious as to why they were cast. Not
I
just
mean, yeah, I mean, Jay says this in his
oh,
question. He's like, was it just me or was Liz the only person to not get any strategic content in the premiere? Like, yeah, I mean, maybe Liz was here to be a a character where she's going to rub people the wrong way. But yeah, no, I mean, obviously
they're like
Liz,
misanthropic, right? But like not in an interesting like Courtney Yates kind of way where she's going to be like dissecting how stupid everyone is. She's just sort of I don't know, just an oddball outsider, but like not in a very interesting way. I don't know. That was just my perception of the episode one edit she got.
yeah, no, I think there's Liz has to bounce back next week. I think the last question we have for now before we wrap it up is also from Jay, where he says, "Which tribe do we think is going to go to tribal next week?" You know, we always say the puzzle is the great equalizer, so it can come down to whatever the puzzle or the last task is. But given what we've seen two challenges in, I would be a fool, I feel like, not to place chips on purple being the most likely to go back to tribal next week.
Yeah, I don't think orange is gonna go. That's like the one thing I just, but because I don't, they didn't really set up like what would happen if they were to go sort of thing. Like they showed some issues right between Randon and Venus, right? But like Green, they already kind of showed like, oh, there's this divide where Charlie could be the swing person. I think Green maybe could go, but I agree that purple is the most likely. And then as I said, to me it would seem pretty straightforward again that Banu or Jess would be the likely ones to go.
I think so too. But I think that's all we really have for now. Brett, is there anything else you have?
No, just thanks for having me on the podcast. It was great to join you. I'm sorry that everyone couldn't see my lovely face on this, but maybe we'll get that fixed for the next time if I'm so welcome to be coming back at some point to discuss.
Yeah, if Brett is able to come back, we will certainly try to fix it for next time. But I think Brett, you did a great job. It was always fun talking with you about Survivor, and I was happy we could do it in this forum.
Yeah, awesome. It was a little different from us, and me, I can go on some of my rants to you about stuff. I had to cool down a little bit for this setting, but it was always nice though, Ryan.
You cooled it down, but you still brought a little bit of heat, which I appreciate.
I think maybe towards the end I kind of let it slip a little bit, but it's okay. Always fun.
That's all good. But thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be back next week at some point. Not sure of the date yet because I know Dylan and I both have a bachelor party next weekend, but we will obviously recap episode 2 in some way, shape, or form. But stay tuned to when that will be. Other than that, just as always, grab your torches and head back to camp. Good night.